You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by bridge engineer Daniel Baxter to talk about his almost daily running commute. We chat about bridges, the gear you need for running in cold weather, staying safe on the roads, and the benefits of running to work. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super wonderful, terrific, amazing Patreon supporters. We appreciate you all keeping this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire going. To join this merry band of city wizards and transportation experts, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note sent with a cool train station stamp. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. We've also got some bonus material up there, so check it out if you haven't already. And speaking of scarves, the heavyweight net bike scarf is back in stock. I'm also going to make a concerted effort to make some new designs, but if you want to get one of the Buster Bike scarves or the Lightweight Bike scarf now, visit theoverheadwire.com or support us on Patreon. And if you'd like to support the show in other ways, you can buy books at the bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire, or find our Cars Are Cholesterol merch at bit.ly/carsarcholesterol. For anything else, including the Town Planning and Practice audiobook, visit theoverheadwire.com and definitely sign up for the almost 20-year-old daily newsletter. Or you can just keep listening and enjoying the show. We appreciate that too. You can also find us on Blue Sky, Mastodon, Threads, Instagram, Flickr, YouTube, Substack, and LinkedIn if you want to connect, usually at the Overhead Wire, but with Flickr, it's Transit Nerds. Some great stuff coming up, so keep on listening and enjoy the show. A quick note for Patreon supporters. I've set up an ad-free podcast RSS feed at Patreon. This means if you want to listen to the show without ads or promotional episodes in your podcatcher of choice, you can do so by heading over to your Patreon account and getting the feed there. I'll post instructions in the show notes of how to do it. And if you aren't a Patreon supporter, you can do so by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Even just $1 a month gets you our podcast free of outside ads. That's patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. It was fun to go back in time and talk a bit about running with Daniel, but also check out the show notes for a personalized running playlist from Daniel through Spotify. It might help you get through your next commute. Daniel Baxter, welcome to the Talking Headways podcast.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Daniel Baxter. I work as a structural engineer, designing new bridges and rehabilitating existing bridges in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I've been for the past 11 years. I'm originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I grew up. Then I did this sort of dual degree BA in physics, BS in civil engineering, and an MS in structural engineering program through Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, and then Washington University in St. Louis, where I graduated in December of 2003. Then I was in Cleveland, Ohio for 10 years working as a bridge engineer, and then moved to Minneapolis to help open my company's office here in 2014, where I've been ever since. So I've been on a Midwestern circle tour.
It's a good tour to be on.
Yeah, it's a good tour. I like these cities.
So give me a little bit of background in terms of like what got you interested in bridges or structural engineering. I'm curious where that came from.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something I've always been interested in. I think since I was a really young child, I remember I'd also been interested in trains for a long time. And I remember my parents got me assembled a sort of HO scale model train table back when I was in third grade or so. And one of my first building projects for it was to sort of build an elevated highway through it, spanning over the tracks and such, and around the city out of balsa wood, which gradually grew more intricate over the years. And yeah, it's just been a lifelong interest of mine.
Yeah. And so you ended up going to school for it, and now you build bridges, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and it can be really satisfying to see the thing that you've been just working on designing for, can be years, literally, just take physical shape, and then it's something a lot of people get to use. So I'd say half of my work tends to be designing new bridges, and probably the other half is rehabilitating or analyzing existing ones. And that's rewarding too, to be able to keep these structures in service for many years to come and make sure they're safe, of course.
Do you have a favorite bridge?
Yes, I would say that is the Mackinac Bridge between the lower and upper peninsula of Michigan. It's one of the longest suspension bridges in the United States. It was built, I think it opened in 1957. And it's a bridge too that my family took on our traditional family vacations up to northern Minnesota from Ann Arbor. So I think it has kind of significance to me, but it's a really impressive structure. It was designed in the wake of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse. And I mean, if you look at the structure, you can kind of see how it's a reaction to that. It has like the roadway is supported by like a really deep stiffening truss, as it's called, to keep the bridge from moving around too much in the wind. And the middle two lanes of it have steel grating to help the wind pass through it rather than move the bridge around, which gives the whole suspension bridge spans of it just a really sort of robust, a strong look to them. And just it has like really gradual long approach spans on each side of it too. So just the whole experience of crossing that bridge it's a really great experience because you sort of see the suspension spans and the towers off in the distance, and then they get closer, and it's just a real cool bridge.
Can you explain the Tacoma Narrows for folks that might know? I know what it is, but I think that just is a fascinating history, and the videos of that are really arresting as well.
Oh, yes. I feel like if you were going to elementary school in the 1980s, and maybe they stopped doing this, but I remember like everyone, it seems like, saw the film strip of a suspension bridge that's like oscillating in the wind, and eventually the oscillations just get larger and the bridge comes down. It was located in the Tacoma Narrows in Washington State. I believe it was open I should know the exact date. I want to say like early 1940s or so. And at the time, the thinking of its designers was that just a pretty slender steel, what's called the steel plate girder. It's just essentially like two steel girders on either side of the roadway that aren't very deep, was of a sufficient rigidity to support the structure against oscillations from wind. But I think right after it opened, people started to notice that it was moving around more than was like desirable under wind. And then on the fateful day, those oscillations just kept increasing and just became too much, and it came down.
I'll put a link to the video in the show notes. It's crazy. Why do you think people, and we'll get to our main topic, which is actually totally different than bridge construction, but I'm just fascinated by this topic because you're an expert. I'm wondering why people are psychologically drawn to bridges. I mean, I'm always fascinated by the bridges that you cross when you go into different cities and stuff. My parents lived in Rotterdam, so we have the Erasmusbrug there. And I just made a trip to visit my wife's family in China. And so we went between Macau and Hong Kong on that bridge, which is a really long bridge. And so they spark some sort of imagination in us, and there's a psychological connection to them. I'm wondering if there's something to that specifically.
I think there really is. I think off the top of my head that it's probably because they're part of transit systems, whether it's a highway or a railroad or pedestrian bike facility. And as being part of that, like they're part of the journey you take to get somewhere. And I think that having particularly the more sort of monumental structures, more monumental bridges, just being part of a journey you take, I think they kind of, in a way, bring like a physical reality to something that might feel kind of symbolic as part of taking a journey from one place to another.
Okay, well, let's talk about running. I wanted to talk to you about this subject because I'm big into running in the past, and I ran a lot in high school and college. I got up to like 90 miles a week. I was really like jamming it out, but I stopped running in like 2005 because my body was like telling me stop. But I've always been fascinated by this topic, specifically as it pertains to cities. My connection to running in Austin when I was at the University of Texas was, basically I learned every street within a 10-mile radius of the university, like every street. I've probably been on every street maybe twice. And it gives you kind of this connection to cities that I think is really interesting because you're taking it at that running pace. And so I'm curious for you, first off, what's your history with running?
My history with running's relatively recent. Actually, growing up, I wasn't really athletic at all, and running is not something that occurred to me as something I'd want to do. Like from time to time in PE, they'd make us run a mile or something like that, and I never enjoyed it. I remember I think it was my sophomore year of high school, we did the President Kennedy physical fitness evaluation thing, and in the fall, a friend and I were running around the track to do our mile, and I was trying to keep a decent pace, and he was just like, slow down. The whole point of this is to show improvement in the spring when they'll test us again. And so I was like, okay. And I think that spring loop was probably the last time I ran anywhere until 2012, when a relatively new bridge I had helped design in Cleveland had a 5K race that was being held, that sort of in honor of it, because it was a pretty new structure that had replaced an older bridge that had been falling apart for a long time over the Cleveland Zoo. And my coworkers were like, hey, you really should run in this race. You helped design it. And I'm like, well, I've never run anywhere. But my wife and I had been taking some cycling classes. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I can do this. So ran a few loops around the block near our house and was like, I think this is possible. So did the race, gave it a try. I think my time was probably 31 minutes or something like that. And was like, oh, I actually could do this. And that was the start of it, and just kept trying to go for longer distances from that point on, and then completed my first marathon, not very quickly, but did complete it in 2015.
It's interesting because when you start getting the running bug, some folks take it really far and they want to go and run marathons and they run 10Ks and all this stuff. And it seems like you've gone the same way. But the training for that requires, and this is one of the reasons I don't run anymore, is because the training for that requires a lot of effort, a lot of time. It's a drain on your time. I mean, I had an atypical college experience because I was running. So we were up at 6 a.m. We were training twice a day. And so, most people are out on the weekends partying. We were going to meets and stuff. And so you took this and decided, well, I need to get my miles in, but I can't do it by taking away time from my family and all that stuff. So I'm curious how you came to the realization that running for commuting was the answer to that problem.
I think it's a couple things. One is that I'm fortunate to live in a urban neighborhood near the Mississippi River that's about 6 miles from downtown Minneapolis. And also fortunate enough to be working in an office building that has showers in it. And I'd fallen into the pattern of taking the bus to the light rail just for my typical commute, which also parallel paved bike trails much of the way. And just with the time it takes to walk to the bus stop and wait for the bus and then get to the light rail and wait for the train. And I realized that, the time that the bus to the train takes door to door, I realized that it really isn't terribly quicker than what it would take to actually run that distance. And I think I'd seen maybe a couple articles on the subject. I know a professor here at the University of Minnesota, Evan Roberts, published an article about run commuting in a local active transportation news site, streets.mn, in 2014, which I'm pretty sure I read. And that got me thinking that seemed like all the ingredients were in place, that the commute was a runnable distance. There were dedicated trails I could use. And then, once I got to the building, there's a shower facility available. And there's also public transit I could take if I had to get home, so that I wasn't locked into running both ways. So seeing that all the ingredients were there to make it work, plus the feeling that, if I really want to improve at running, I need to be getting in more miles than what I was able to get in with because at the time when I finished my first marathon, I had 4 minutes and 59 seconds or 4 hours. No, not 4 minutes, 4 hours, 59 minutes and then some seconds. It didn't go so well. And I realized that the reason was I just wasn't running enough miles. Our daughter was 3 months old at the time. So I just felt I couldn't really be running that much more after work or on the weekends than I was at the time. But hey, with all the ingredients it seems like in place to be able to run to the office, I could really run quite a bit more in the time I'd been using to take transit, maybe just about 15 minutes or so more. And it really seemed to be the best way to improve my running.
Are you still racing? Are you still going marathons, or is it just a commute thing now?
Yeah, I haven't run a marathon since 2022. I'm thinking about it maybe later this year. It's mostly a commute thing now for me. I have a couple friends who are into running, and there's a sort of series of races we've been doing. In the spring, we just did a 10K, and then we're going to do a 10-mile trail race in May, which then will lead up to a half marathon between Two Harbors and Duluth. It's called Grandma's Half Marathon in June. So it's fun to have friends to be training with and racing with, but I would say that's not probably the main focus of mine.
So what does your typical commute look like? What's the routine in terms of getting yourself ready to go for a run and then getting out into the world and then getting to work and sitting down at your desk?
Oh, well, I went through that routine today, so I can drive it.
I was wondering if you were going to do it today before our discussion.
It seemed fitting, but I'd probably do it anyway because Wednesday is typical run day for me. But I'm kind of slow in the morning. So on a typical day, I'll wake up at 4:30. And then just by the time I've done everything I need to do to get ready to leave, usually I'm walking out the door just a little before 5:30. I wish it took me less than an hour, but just making sure I have everything I need and I'm not locked out of the building and all, it just takes a little bit. And then the route I usually take, we're fortunate enough, our house is fairly close to the Mississippi, and there's a dedicated trail along the Mississippi all the way from our neighborhood to the outskirts of downtown Minneapolis. It's just a few blocks away. So once I get on that, I'll just take that trail downtown, and there are no major There's a couple driveways for parking lots, but there are no street crossings. So it's a real nice direct route. Then I'll run through the last miles through the outskirts and then downtown Minneapolis, and then typically arrive at my building a little before 6:30, just depending on like if it's a relaxed run, like really relaxed, it'll take me about an hour if I'm like pushing the pace to train for a race or just because I'm in a rush. I can do it in less time. I think the quickest I've done the commute's a little over 44 minutes. But then like today, I'll get to my building, say around like 6:25 in the morning, go up to my office, like get my clothes. I have the clothes rack where I keep my dress clothes and I keep the rest of my clothes in an office drawer, just get those things together, go down to the shower and get cleaned up and then sit down at my desk, ready to go and freshly showered around 7.
What time do you go to sleep to get up at 4:30?
Probably later than I should. Usually on a weekday, like 9:30, sometimes earlier. I aim for 9:30-ish.
Are you a morning lark instead of? I'm a night owl, so I can't go to bed before midnight. My brain doesn't shut off until then.
I think that like left to my own devices, actually might be a night owl too, because like when we're on vacation, I tend to go to bed a lot later. But in terms of working, I'm a morning person. Like I like to be in my desk by 7 and to have like that hour to get things in order, do whatever I need to do before meetings start up and things. Cause basically no one ever seems to want to have a meeting before 8 in the morning, and even like an 8 a.m. meeting's pretty rare. So from work standpoint, I do like starting a little early.
Get it over faster. For being on the West Coast too, I'm always fascinated by that because sometimes people would want to have meetings like 8 a.m. East Coast time. I'm like, come on guys, like 5 a.m. doesn't work for me. You mentioned safety. You mentioned like you only have a couple driveways on your way there, but I'm curious how you navigate safety at times when, the sun hasn't come up yet and it's dark. And so you have those safety issues that might come up because you're a runner and you're an individual versus all the vehicles out there, et cetera.
Except for like a few months during the summer, it's either like completely dark for my morning commute or dark at the beginning of it, or the sun is just coming up. So I always wear a headlamp and like a red flashing tail light that I just clip to the back of the headlamp. And my backpack has a reflective sash on it too. The first 5 miles there, like one nice thing about Minneapolis is that the trails in the parks, such as the West River Parkway trail that I take, they actually have 2 separate trails, one for cyclists and one for pedestrians. So just sticking to the pedestrian trail, I can feel pretty safe that I don't have to worry about a cyclist hitting me or something like that. Then once I get to the downtown area, I take a route in that still parallels the river that actually doesn't have too much street crossings for it. So it's really only the last half mile that I'm navigating through intersections. That's probably, I've never thankfully had an accident, but that's probably the most dangerous part of the run. And I just try to like run really defensively, particularly when I'm running home. Like I find that there are not too many people out and about actually at 6:30 in the morning, but going home, there are a lot of people trying to make left turns and right turns. And even if I have a walk signal, I try to make sure to like make eye contact with people who are looking to turn right or turn left before I run in front of them, because I know that they may be looking at traffic coming from the opposite direction and not even thinking to look for a pedestrian. And that strategy has worked pretty well. I also, for the afternoons when I'm running home for that first mile out of downtown, I always just run at a slower pace too, and then don't speed up until I get to the river trail.
My teammates and I in college, we banged our fair share of car hoods because they weren't looking when we were crossing the street and had the right of way. So I understand that completely. It's always an interesting dance with cars and drivers because, you're never quite sure when they're looking. And even if you look them straight in the eye, sometimes it's like they're looking past you. It's crazy.
And I don't know, I feel like maybe it's stereotypical, but I feel like I have found that for whatever reason, drivers of German luxury cars are the most problematic in this regard. If I see like that BMW 7 Series trying to make that left turn, I'm like, they're not stopping.
Yeah. There's also a weather aspect of this too that's interesting, especially since you're in Minneapolis. And here in the Bay Area, I don't think people would worry about layers and balaclavas and things like that too much. But you have, specifically in the winter, you have a particular issue with cold climate that happens.
Oh, yeah. I don't have the source of the statistics, but I remember reading somewhere that like Minneapolis is the major city in the country that has the largest swing between like the average cold temperature and like the average high temperature between the winter and the summer. So there is a really wide temperature range here. I think as far as the cold weather goes, I've just sort of figured it out gradually by trial and error. I'm someone that likes to stick to routines. So I think as I started to do this, as it got colder, I didn't want that to be the reason that, I've got to I've got to stop. So I just kept figuring out what works with adding layers. And then if things went okay at a given cold temperature, then if it was even colder than that, I'd be like, okay, I think this will work plus one additional layer. And I think the coldest that I've run to the office was a minus 23. And that required a lot more layers than usual. Like one strategy I use is that if it's below 0, I just try not to have any exposed skin. And there's products like one of them seems like it's intended for like people working in the Arctic called the Cold Avenger, which is this face mask thing you put on that kind of creates a pool of warm air in front of your mouth. And so like between that and no exposed skin, I've found that actually those below 0 temps really aren't so terrible.
Your wife and your colleagues at work seem to worry about you, though, at temperatures that drop below, I guess, negative 23, because they wouldn't let you go one day.
Yeah, I wanted to see how all of this gear would work. This was back in 2019 when I think it was going to be minus 28. And like the polar vortex had been making the rounds in the news. And the afternoon before, a couple of actually sort of senior manager type people in the company had called me up because they knew I like to do this. And they were like, please don't run tomorrow. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll think about it. But then overnight when I was sleeping, my wife left out all these Post-it notes in the bathroom saying, please don't run. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I better not.
Yeah. But it's probably the best.
Yeah, so I haven't figured out like if everything works at minus 28, but I know it does at minus 23.
My coldest race was negative 19 in, it was at Terre Haute, Indiana, I think it was. And because we wore singlets and shorts, we didn't have like all the equipment, right? We have to wear our uniforms. Yeah. We just stole our comforters from our hotel rooms and just wore them until the gun went off. And then we threw them off and started running. Yeah. But it was, it was cold. When it's that cold, sweat doesn't freeze at 32 degrees, right? It's got salt in it. And so there's icicles hanging off of people's beanies. There's like, I couldn't feel my fingers. My mom had to untie my shoes after the race was finished. I was just like, it was a mess. And I was like, I can't deal with it. I mean, when you're equipped with more gear, I think it's better. But if you're just racing in the cold weather, it's a little bit different, I think.
Oh, I bet that sounds terrible, particularly waiting for the race to begin. Like I've done a couple of like turkey trots on Thanksgiving morning, which have been really cold, and just waiting. It doesn't really bother me once the race starts, but just waiting for them to start is just. And I can't imagine minus 9. Like it's one thing when it's like 20 degrees and you're waiting for it to, but like minus 19.
It was bad. It was ugly. But we made it through, finished the race. Didn't do too hot. Everybody had to race it. But the funny part is that you see the guys from like Wisconsin and all like North Minnesota and stuff. They all had these massive beards and like they were ready, right? Because they'd been doing it. But you know, us kids from Texas, we didn't know any better. How do you deal with injury? Because I feel like that's something that could curtail some of the commuting that you do if you get like a pulled muscle or something along those lines. It's not quite the same when you're riding the bus or the train. You have to worry about your body a little bit more.
Yeah. I would say 2 approaches to it. One, I found that just since I've started like regularly strength training in 2018, that seems to have helped, but not like completely eliminated injuries. Cause like before I was doing that, I just seemed to have, more issues with say like IT band syndrome or things of that nature. And I think that's particularly true when I'm carting around a backpack, particularly if it's heavily loaded, just strengthening the lower body to make sure that it's not getting overtaxed by that, and how it sort of throws off where the center of mass is too. So just having that additional strength. And then I have had 2, since I've been really in the full swing of it, 2 significant injuries, like plantar fasciitis and then a abductor strain. And what's worked for me is working with a Minnesota-based physical therapist who also is a runner herself. Her name is Dr. Jamie Blumentritt. Her approach has been to just like keep me running, but to have like run, walk intervals or run a shorter distance and then like hop on a bike share. I guess luckily for me, the injuries have taken place at the beginning of the summer when the bike share bikes are out. So that's allowed me to say, okay, I'm going to like run, walk 4 miles or something, and then jump on a bike for the rest of the way and do the runs at a reduced pace. So although it's frustrating when those injuries happen and kind of get in the way of races or slow my pace, like that approach at least has allowed me to keep the active commute going.
And this is something I ask folks too, is like, how often do you replace your shoes? When I was running, it was every 500 miles, no matter what they look like. They probably look pretty clean, but if you don't do it every 500 miles, the midsole will break down and you can't even tell. But I'm curious, like from your perspective, what's your like gear replacement, the signs that something needs to be fixed?
I'm I should be better at tracking the mileage on my shoes on Strava than I am. I should put the new shoes in there. I'm a heel striker, so usually the sign for me is that just the rubber at the base of the sole just starts getting like completely worn off the heels, and that it's just like styrofoam then hitting the ground. So when that happens, that to me is the sign that it's time for new shoes.
You probably should go a little bit before that if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I probably should. I think it probably ends up being maybe, hopefully not more than 500 miles.
Yeah.
But I should keep a closer eye on that than I am.
I just tell people that because it's something that I learned is like when my knees started to get kind of twingy, then I was like, okay, I need a new pair of shoes. And then it went away. And so if you make sure that because people are often like, don't your knees hurt? Don't your joints hurt? And anatomically, your body's made for running. And so, if you keep everything straight and normal and refurbished, then you should be okay. But, wearing a shoe too long, and sometimes that shoe might look okay, but in the midsole breaks down. And that's when the injuries can happen and stuff like that. So I always warn people about that because I think it's something that isn't talked about very much overall, especially on transportation planning podcasts.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely an expense because like the running shoes are cheap.
Well, that's another thing is like it's somewhat expensive to like get all the gear for the winter weather and the shoes and all that stuff. So compared to like your regular commute, are you saving money? Are you spending more money just to run? Are you breaking even? What's the expenditure in terms of that?
From the best I can tell, I think it's cheaper, probably significantly than driving to the office would be, but I'd say it's probably the same amount of money or maybe a little more than taking transit. I tend to buy all of my running gear at the same store. It's St. City Running just across the river in St. Paul. And last year I added up all my credit card charges there and I think they came to about like $450 or so. And then I compared that to like how much bus fare would be for, I think it's probably about like 190 run commutes or something. And it came out about exactly the same. Certainly if you factor in parking in downtown Minneapolis, and my wife and I just did one car, so we have to get a second car. It would be a lot more expensive than the running would be. So, but yeah, I think it's probably comparable to taking transit and paying the transit fare if you're in the office. You save 4 or 5 days a week, maybe more, but like definitely less than driving.
I was thinking also like there's some mental health benefits there. There's some physical benefits. There's longevity. There's healthcare benefits probably there as well. So there's probably like a long-term win, and even over transit and biking, which I think, most people probably should take before they drive to work. But there's probably something to that as well.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I feel fortunate. I seem to be in pretty good health, and it definitely from a mental health standpoint, like I tend to feel like so much better once I actually arrive at the office having run here versus like when I start out, or sometimes I will take transit and I just don't feel as good when I get to the office or get home versus how it feels from having run.
Have you gotten one of the hard to find runner's highs?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like sometimes I'll be like, I actually probably shouldn't feel this good given all the sort of high stakes meetings I have today or what else is in store for the rest of the day. But I'll be like, hey, if it's there, I'll enjoy it as long as it lasts.
I think I only had one once. For all the running I did, I only had one once. But man, that was...
Only once?
Only once. But it was... I mean, I had lots of good days, don't get me wrong. But like, there's something different about that one day that was just like, it was crazy. I'd never felt so good. I think you mentioned in your article, like some sort of a flow state. I felt like my legs were like floating on the concrete. I felt like, this is what people are after when they're going for trying to get a runner's high. This probably would make me come back over and over again.
I think what you're talking about, that sounds more like the flow state thing, which to me is much more rare. Like I usually feel just about after every commute, I'll feel better once I get to my destination if I've run there than when I started. But in terms of the sort of flow state where it starts to feel like you're going really fast, but it also feels effortless at the same time, I feel like that happens only once in a great while. And it seems to be some combination of just how rested my body is at the time and even what music I'm listening to. I don't know if you're a Talking Heads fan, but the song of theirs, like The Great Curve on Remain in Light, goes really well with running, and I've experienced it.
That's so interesting. I'm wondering with your music, because I used to run with a Walkman, which actually was funny because when I ran, it was a tape Walkman, because this is a long time ago, but it was a tape Walkman, and it actually changed my stride because it was like heavier on one side than the other one. And so I could feel my like arm going around more when I was taking a turn on the track, which is kind of weird. But I always tried to like You always have run mixes, but you think that you need like some banger music to like, get you through it. And sometimes I did, but sometimes you also need some soft stuff to like just kind of relax and
Oh
get
yeah.
into it as well. So like, what's your mix of, hardcore, strong stuff versus, and maybe like more techno slash, I don't even know if you listen to that type of stuff, but hard versus softer music?
I'm not sure what genre that I'm in. Maybe given my age, I'm 45. I don't know. Maybe this is all like dad rock now. But in terms of say, like I'm in a race and like really want some high energy music. I mean, maybe this doesn't seem high energy to other people, but I know that Police song, like Synchronicity One, something like a fast beat like that.
Mm.
There's an REM song, a later one, like a Supernatural, Super Serious, it's called. It's like a nice one to finish a race to. Lighter songs, I don't know. I'm a big REM fan, and some of their sort of less driving songs work pretty well for me. But if I hear new songs on the alternative radio station that I like, I'll throw them on my playlist too.
You're an REM fan. Up is a totally underrated album for me. I love that album. I don't know what it is about it, but it's just like that's my jam. I love Life Search Pageant, and I love like I have every one. But Up for some reason is just like, I don't know if it hit me just a certain point in college or something, but I was just like, this is amazing. Yeah. But it's just kind of criminally underrated to me.
I completely agree. I was just talking about this the other day with a friend. We were talking about like, what are your favorite REM albums? And I said, well, I have 6 that I don't think any one of these 6 is better than the other. And just like listing them in chronological order, I'd say they're Murmur, Life's Rich Pageant, Out of Time, Automatic for the People, New Adventures in Hi-Fi, and Up. And I agree that I think Up is criminally underrated too.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's actually kind of personally meaningful to me too, because sort of going back to the beginning of our conversation, just after my junior year in college, I was trying to decide, hey, do I want to go through with this dual degree engineering program, or do I want to do something else? And I was just driving solo up from Ann Arbor up to the North Shore of Minnesota, where my parents were, just to go visit them. And the last song on Up, Falls to Climb, came on just as I was starting to cross the Mackinac Bridge, and it's the sort of these like ethereal layers of synths and things, and I was like, oh, bridges, yes, this is what I should do. So like that made the decision for me, and I just went ahead and did it.
That's awesome. It's funny. I'm gonna be honest about this. I used to be a running snob, and I used to be like, those people running for fun. Why are they doing that? You should be racing. You should be like, testing yourself. And I grew out of that at some point. But I find it interesting to think about like running and starting like you have later in life, and, getting into it. And, not necessarily you're racing a little bit, but mostly it's just kind of like as a way to get to work. But also, I imagine anyways, now it's a part of your routine. You said you're a routine oriented person, but I kind of wonder about that. Like, do you feel like, is it something that you see people and you're like, okay, anybody can do this and I'm in? Or was it something that was a little bit daunting before you got started? Because I'm wondering if folks listening might be daunted by it as something that's like, maybe when I was younger, I could have done that, but now it's like too much.
I would say it was definitely daunting for me because, those like initial experiences where they make you run the mile in school. Like,
I don't like that, by the way. I don't like that they make it into a punishment.
Yeah.
It's actually worthwhile otherwise. But
like, I never enjoyed those. I always felt exhausted afterwards. I think they left me feeling that like, hey, why would anyone do this for any reason? And it was just something that never really occurred to me as something I'd even want to do. I think I've never really been that good at sports. And I think like back in 2012, when I was kind of talked into it and discovered that, oh, this is actually something I can do. And now that I think when the goal is just to sort of try to like get through a given distance rather than like run as fast as you can around a track 4 times, then that kind of reorients it and just makes it seem a lot more doable. And I mean, not that the larger distances didn't still like feel kind of daunting, but I think looking at it from a perspective is like, how can I comfortably run this distance at about the same pace rather than running as in like, how fast would you run if say you're getting chased by a bear, which maybe was the idea back in school, just makes it seem a lot more doable and pleasant.
I don't know if you're supposed to run away from bears. I think they're way faster than us. I think you're supposed to just make yourself
I think you're
really
right.
big.
I think you're probably supposed to like put your arms
yell really loud and make yourself big as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Don't run away from bears, please. But yeah, I just... Speaking of crazy things, what's your craziest experience running? Is there anything that's like happened on your way or to and from work that is just like, wow, that was a crazy day on the trail?
Let me think about that. I feel pretty fortunate actually that like I've been doing this for, I think as of the summer will be 10 years. And it's actually been like really mundane in a way. Like, I'm lucky I haven't been the victim of any crime or had any super close calls with getting hit by a car or anything like that. So I feel good that just over like all of this time going back and forth, that nothing too out of the ordinary has really ever happened. I mean, probably the most sort of out there runs have been some of the extreme weather, like getting out of the house and discovering that everything is like covered in a layer of ice, but then like putting on ice spikes and being able to get to the office. And then like, I remember one day I got to the office and felt a little bad that I was like 15 minutes late because I'd been going slowly on the ice. And then like no one else arrived until like an hour and a half later because they'd all gotten stuck in traffic. And this was before the pandemic when people would come into the office anyway, even if there was an ice storm. I don't know. Sometimes when it's really hot out, or it seems like people act a little more squirrely for whatever reason.
Yeah. You get a different clientele out there, I imagine, at different weather points.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for folks who might want to try this out? Like, what's the first step they should take if they want to just like test it out first? Definitely don't like go out and buy every piece of gear and then decide to, to not do it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is there any suggestions you have as a long time run commuter?
Sure. Like, I think a good way to try it out is to just try running home from your office or wherever your workplace is, particularly if there's a way that you can store some things overnight safely in your workplace. Because like, even if you just have a cell phone holder and some pockets, often you can just take what you need to get into your house and get back the next day that way without needing to buy a backpack. And you could also try to see if you could run part of the way and then like hop on a bus for the rest of the way, or hop on a bike share, although that's a little more dicey because it'd be hard to do that with a helmet. So, but like if you're able to pair up a trial run with a bus on the way home, see how that works, because then that doesn't require necessarily the backpack or the workplace shower or any of that stuff. And then if you like it, you can keep doing that. And then if you still like it, then I think maybe that's the time to start investing in the gear, like the backpack, and figuring out what do you do post run when you get to the workplace. And there's also, I mean, some of the times when I found running to be the most convenient too is not even back from my office, but sometimes it's just like going home from, say, an event at the University of Minnesota where the transit option would take almost an hour because there's not really a transit corridor between my house and the campus here, but I can run it in about, I don't know, like 35 minutes or something like that. So even just like a point to point run like that can sometimes be a pretty rewarding thing to try to cut off a lot of time, or like run into some place where probably most cities have one of those neighborhoods where there's like a wide street that would be scary to bike on, and all like strip malls and driveways and lots of crossing traffic. I mean, I have one of those near my house, and I find that it's easier for me to run there to buy things than I wouldn't really want to bike there. So sometimes just given a one-off out and back run, I mean, I think you would need a backpack for that. Just to see how that goes can be a good way to approach it too.
Yeah. Well, I want to give a shout out to Streets That I'm In, where I found your article about run commuting, and I do a weekly or almost bi-weekly piece for them too. And so I really appreciate what they've been doing, and excited that that's where I found it. And that's where you're, putting your pen to paper, as it were.
Oh yeah, they're a great website. I'd like to thank them for publishing my article. The first article I wrote for them. Usually the rest of the articles I've written just tend to be like technical articles about bridge designs.
Yeah. Well, where can folks find you if you wish to be found?
Oh, let me see. Well, I think I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn if you want to contact me there. I am on Strava. I don't mind being followed there. Those two places are probably the easiest places to find me. It's one of those.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for having me on your show. Appreciate that.
Thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of the Overhead Wire and appears first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters for supporting this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Sign up for our 18-year-old daily newsletter by visiting theoverheadwire.com, or check the show notes for other cool merch and opportunities to connect. Follow along using your podcatcher of choice, but if you can't find it there, you can always find the show at its original home, usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.